Seriously, what's the creepiest, scariest thing that you've seen but no one believes you? Story 1. It was over 10 years ago now when a friend and I visited Japan. It was our first time there, so we went with a tour company. However, after the tour ended, we stayed an extra night in a hotel in East Ikebukuro. During the tour leader tells us stories of haunted hotels and other urban myths, as you do over beers or when you're enjoying a late-night onsen. One of the things he'd tell us was to be wary if you find a room where the head of the bed was positioned next to the window. So if you look up while lying in bed, you look out the window. He tried to scare us by saying in those rooms, ghosts would come through the window at night and drag you out to your death. Back at the East Ikebukuro Hotel, we checked in the early evening, and the first thing we noticed was how small the room was. The second thing was they gave us a double bed instead of 2 singles. The third, the bed head was right next to the window. We rationalized that the room was too small really to align the bed any other way, and the tour leader was full of shit. To be honest, we were more annoyed that we had to share a double bed. No homo. We decided to just let it go since it was just for one night. So we went out to dinner before turning in for the night. That night, I got woken up by a door slamming shut, and I jolted up. There, sitting at the foot of the bed, is a woman in a blue kimono. She had long hair, and from what I could make out, her kimono had butterflies on it. I freak out, dive, and bury my head under my pillow. Looking back, this was a useless move if anything bad were to happen. I remember thinking, is this real? How can I check without looking? In my genius, I decided to shuffle my foot down the bed, thinking if I don't touch anything, it's just my imagination. I didn't think about what I'd do if I did touch something. Little by little, my foot moves down the bed when I notice that there is definitely a depression at the foot of the bed. Something, was there. I retreat my foot, start to sweat, and at this point, just start repeatedly saying the Lord's Prayer. I must have fainted, or fallen back asleep. I remember waking up at 6 the next morning and my friend was already dressed and packed. I asked him if he saw or heard anything last night, and all he said was, I don't want to talk about it, let's check it out. I've heard of haunted hotels and ghost sightings before, but to actually experience it firsthand, that's a whole different level of scary. It's fun how the tour leader's warning about the bed position came back to haunt you, no pun intended. I can only imagine how unsettling it must have been to wake up and see a woman in a blue kimono sitting at the foot of the bed. And to feel the depression in the bed where she was sitting? That's some next-level horror movie stuff. Maybe it was just your imagination running wild. Or maybe there really was a ghost in the room. Either way, it makes for a pretty creepy story to tell around the campfire. Story 2. Was working at a convenience store, late shift. Just about nobody comes in from about 10:45 until we close at midnight. The way the store is set up is from behind the counter, I'm about 6 feet from the door in front of me, and to my left and directly above it are 2 security monitors. It's a very small store. The monitors flip through a few different camera angles. In the back, just outside the front door. In the lot, in the shed, by the coolers, and then repeat the cycle again. I'm working by myself, just me and my phone. 11 o'clock hits, nobody comes in for a while, probably 20 minutes of silence. Some time passes and I glance at the security monitor. It's showing the angle of the lot, and it shows in such a way that you could see someone's back as they enter the front door. And it's pretty dark out, so the best way to see if a customer's coming in is to watch the cameras. It's a slight delay, so I would see something happen on the monitors a second or two after it actually happened. When the angle from the lot comes back on, I see a man from behind enter the front door. Black guy, not too tall, leather jacket. He's got a grocery bag in his right hand. I glance down at the front door, which is just below the monitors. Nobody's there. I thought it was a glitch, maybe an old tape replaying. I watched through another cycle of the camera angles, which lasts about 45 seconds or so, just to see if it would happen again. Halfway through the cycle, a door swings open, and into the store steps a young man. Black guy, not too tall, wearing a leather jacket. He's holding a grocery bag in his right hand. The icing on the cake was that he didn't buy anything. He just looked around for a minute and left. Mind playing tricks on me, I guess, but I was spooked out of my mind. Didn't work any more nights after that. Wow, now I feel like I freaked out dozens of convenience store clerks as I paced to the door and back to the car, arguing with myself whether the 500 calories in a home run pie is worth it or not for my late night cheat meal. It's funny how our minds can play tricks on us, especially when we're tired and working the late shift. It's always a bit unsettling to be alone in a store at night, especially when something like that happens. It's possible that it was just a strange coincidence, but I can see how it'd be hard to shake that feeling of unease. Story 3. It's not that people don't believe me. It's more that I hardly believe it myself. It was late, probably between 1 and 3 a.m., and I was sitting at an intersection waiting for the light to go green. Across from me was a dark road with trees on either side and thick woods off to the left and houses off to the right. So I'm sitting there listening to music. when I see something move at the edge of the woods to the left. Now, this is rural New Jersey, so things moving in the woods are either bears or deer, which aren't scary, but deer will F your car up if they run out in front of you. I turned my high beams on to see what it was, but they didn't reach the woods. Then I saw more movement before the light turned green. I made my left turn and drove off, but I couldn't see what it was. The next day, I drive the same route on my way to work, and when I get to that intersection, there's cops and ambulance over at the edge of the woods where I saw the movement the night before. I asked a coworker what happened, and he said that they had found dismembered body parts there early that morning. It's one thing to encounter a bear or a deer, but the unknown is always more frightening. And then to later discover that there were dismembered body parts found in that exact location, it must have been absolutely terrifying. I can't even begin to imagine the range of emotions you must have experienced in the aftermath of that discovery. Story 4. My friend's grandma's house is right up against a cemetery. He always told me it was haunted and would see crazy stuff there, but I never believed him. One night we were over at her house, and I swear I saw something the size of a toddler run from the living room, through the dining room and into the kitchen. When I looked at my friend, and he just went, "Did you just see that kid run through the fucking house?" It looked more like a fast-running shadow than an actual person. There was no one there. There were no kids around. This is Grandma's house, and we were the only ones over. It was late at night, and no doors opened or closed. When we told his grandma, she was just like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It happens all the time." After that, I started believing in ghosts. My friend also said when he used to sleep there, he used to push the spare room's TV away from him so it faced away from him, because he would wake up at night and see people in the reflection staring back at him watching him sleeping. Scared the out of him. Story 5. 'Twas the night before my stepmom died. Lost her battle to cancer. I was 22, was spending the night in bed with my 9-year-old half-brother, cuddling him and telling him his mom was going to be okay. It wasn't going to hurt anymore. It's about 3 a.m. at the time, and after a while, he immediately sits upright in bed, smiles, says, "I promise to be a good boy, Mommy. I love you." And my stepmom has been bedridden for the last month, so she's not moving anywhere. But I swear on my life, and my little brother agrees with me. For a split second, I saw her standing in the doorway, wearing her big, giant fur coat, just smiling at us, and just looking relieved. Brother went to sleep about 2 minutes later. I left to go into my dad and stepmom's room to check on her to see my dad awake, and telling me she died about half an hour ago. I genuinely believe she stopped by on her way to the other side to check in on her 2 kids and make sure we'd be okay without her before she left. This story is heart-wrenching and touching at the same time. Losing a loved one to cancer is never easy, and I can only imagine the pain and sorrow that the author and their family went through. However, the image of the stepmother standing in the doorway smiling and relieved is a beautiful and comforting thought. It's as if she wanted to say goodbye to her children before moving on to the next world. It's moments like these that remind us of the love that never dies, and how it transcends even death. Story 6. Me, my wife, and kids were driving near some cliffs near where we live. We stopped to take in the view and some photos. I lined the kids up with the cliff drop and ocean behind them and took some pics. As they took a step back for me to get a better picture, they fell off the edge of the cliff. I woke up, sweating and petrified. The nightmare felt so real. One of those that really stick with you. I went for a pee and checked in on all the kids, all fast asleep, in bed apart from my youngest 5-year-old daughter. She was on the floor. She'd fallen out of bed, but somehow was still sleeping. Next to her on the floor, knocked over, I assume when she fell, was a bedside lamp. The bulb from the lamp had burnt, was singeing into the carpet, I think ready to burst into flames. Nice of your subconscious to wake you before the house went up in flames, though. Story 7. When I was like 10, I talked to someone all the time through the 6-inch tall slit window to our basement. He would always tell me not to go into the basement when I'd ask to see him, because he wouldn't be there anyway. Talked to him for a year and a half. Told me not to tell my mom, because he didn't want to scare her. A few years later, I was telling my mom about the guy in the basement. I quit talking to him by then. And she told me she could believe me, because when I was a baby, she would always see my door to my room open, like someone was peeking in to see if I was all right, and then shutting it quietly. Told me that she figured it was the guy who owned the house before us, because that used to be his grandkid's room. It was one of those small towns where our grandparents knew each other. It must have been so eerie talking to someone through a small window in the basement for over a year and a half, especially when they warned you not to tell your mom about them. And then to find out years later that your mom had her own encounter with a ghost in the same house? It's like something out of a horror movie. I hope this experience didn't leave too much of a lasting impression on you, and that you're able to look back on it now with a sense of curiosity and fascination. Story 8. I don't know what it was because I don't remember it, because I was a baby and toddler. but my mom certainly does and mentions it occasionally. I was her first kid, and when I was born, my parents lived in an old house in Scotland. Mom says that really quite often, both I and the dog would stop whatever we were doing at the same time, and both look towards the stairs, as if we were watching something either descend or ascend them. This is corroborated by my dad and a few of their friends who saw it happening. It's basically their friend group's weird, inexplicable story. I just happened to be an unwitting part of it. Unfortunately, I have no memory of this at all. And the dog in question died 30 years ago, so they'll never get their answer. Yeah, if the dog was still alive, someone could have asked him what was going on. Story 9. I was a missionary in South Africa. One of the creepiest things that happened to me was on New Year's Eve. During that night, I woke up feeling really thirsty. I walked toward the refrigerator in the kitchen, and as I was drinking water, I turned around and the front door was wide open. I could see the stars in the black sky and hear the faint sound of crickets in the distance. Not thinking any of it, I closed it and went back to bed. In the morning, my missionary companion woke up first and noticed the door was wide open. It was then that we realized we had been robbed throughout the night, and I still remember my heart dropping as I realized the perpetrators were most likely in the dark house while I was in the kitchen in the middle of the night. Still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Waking up in the middle of the night feeling thirsty and finding the front door wide open must have been alarming enough, but the realization that your home had been robbed while you were sleeping must have been truly terrifying. It's understandable that this experience still gives you goosebumps to this day. I hope that you and your missionary companion were able to recover from this experience, and that you were able to find a sense of safety and security again. Story 10. Was walking through the Rockies and managed to tear the muscle on the side of my foot, so I was hobbling back. I was on my own, like a moron. In the space of hobbling back to Jasper, I saw a white bear. I think they are called spirit bears, just sitting, watching me. Literally thought, fuck's sake, I'm gonna die here mauled by a bear and no one knows where I am. But it just sat there and pawed the dirt in the direction of the town. I limped on, keeping an eye on it, and it just watching me. Then, I swear to God, no more than 5 minutes later, a effing wolf appears, limping exactly on the same foot I'm limping on, eyes me up and continues on its journey. I think I was even too pathetic to bother with the moral of that story. I was petrified though, either way. Story 11. When I was 16, I skipped school to stay home and play video games. I set up my PlayStation and made some Hot Pockets, and right when I get good and comfortable, I hear footsteps walking to my room. I glanced outside and saw my parents weren't home yet, but was still afraid I was gonna get caught. Seeing no place to hide, I froze. Suddenly, the door was flung open, and I heard a blood-curdling scream echo through the house. I must have sat there petrified in that room for half an hour before going outside and waiting for my parents to come home. I tried to explain to my friends later what happened, but they thought I was just pulling some bullshit from the internet. This'll teach that little shit not to eat my Hot Pockets. Your mom, probably. It sounds like a really scary experience, and I can understand why you were petrified. It's hard to know what to do in those kinds of situations, especially when you're caught off guard like that. I'm sorry your friends didn't believe you when you tried to explain what happened. I hope you were able to talk to someone about what happened, and that it didn't leave you feeling too traumatized. If you ever feel you need to talk about it, don't hesitate to reach out to someone you trust. Story 12. I was maybe 4 or 5. We lived in a somewhat questionable neighborhood at the time, and looking out the window one night, I swear I saw a neighbor from an apartment nearby with her son. He was on one of those plastic trikes. I believe she ran inside to grab a jacket. In the 3 minutes she was gone, a vehicle pulled up and snatched the kid and took off. His mom came back and was looking for him. I tried to tell the adults in my apartment, but no one believed me, or the other kids with us. Still the scariest thing that haunts me to this day. Holy F, this is honestly the most terrible one I've read. Story 13. When I was a teenager, I used to keep the remote to my stereo on the lip of my bed frame. One night around midnight, I woke up to my stereo playing static at me, only it was getting louder. I could see the volume number moving higher and higher. So it's pitch black, and the static is getting louder and louder, and the remote wasn't in its usual place for some reason. I had no choice but to jump out of bed to turn it off. I turned the light and, freaking out, found it. Under my bed. Like, deep under my bed, at that middle point that's super hard to reach. Did not like it. That sounds like a really creepy experience. I can definitely understand why you didn't like it. It's funny how something as simple as a remote for your stereo can turn into a spooky situation like that. Story 14. My one weird thing was this. Some friends and I were hanging out one summer's eve. We were around 15. It was night, clear, and we were all lying on my friend's trampoline in the backyard. We were all just chatting and looking at the stars. Suddenly, we're all like, what the F? Did you just see that? We all swore we saw a formation of stars trade places with each other. They sort of left a tail, like a shooting star before resettling in their new positions. They all moved at the exact same time. It was strange. 3 of us seemed to see the same thing. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.